Hi, I'm Suzanne Rathie, and I'm your instructor for this course. And my hope is to provide you with a short video on each of the theories that we're going to talk about this semester. So welcome to Introduction to Ethics. And the first theory that we're going to talk about is cultural relativism. So the way I've laid out this course is that my basic theme is how do you live the best and most worthwhile life? So this semester we're going to be going through several different theories, and these philosophers will tell you exactly how to lead the best and most worthwhile life. Now there may be things that you agree with, and there may be things that you disagree with, and that's okay. We may have to pick apart different pieces of each theory to come up with our own version of how we're going to live the best and most worthwhile life. So we begin with cultural relativism. And when we're talking about cultural relativism, we're talking about the idea that, in an ethical sense, that there are no universal cross-cultural standards by which to judge moral behavior, that there isn't necessarily anything that is universally right or wrong when we're talking about morals and ethics. So right and wrong is determined by each culture, and each particular culture will determine what is good or bad or successful or unsuccessful. So different cultures are going to have different moral codes. There's no such thing as a universal truth in ethics, according to cultural relativists. Now, our own way seems very right to us, it seems natural to us, and sometimes it's very hard to conceive that others live differently. But from a cultural relative perspective, if you wanted to lead the best and most worthwhile life, you would recognize that individual circumstances may be treated differently in particular cultures. So what are the main elements of cultural relativism? It's the idea that different societies have different moral codes, that the moral code of a particular society is going to determine what is right and what is wrong within that society. So it does become right, regardless of whether it's right or wrong in a different society. There's no objective standard by which you can judge one society's code as better or worse than another. In other words, there's no universal truth in ethics. There's no moral truth that holds for all people at all times. The moral code of one particular society or one particular culture has no special status. It's just one among many. So your own particular cultural values are just one among many. And, of course, cultural relativists also believe that it might even be arrogant for us to judge the culture of other people. We should instead adopt an attitude of tolerance toward the practices of other cultures and not engage in judgment. Now, there's going to be some good points and some bad points on these, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Basically, the cultural differences argument, which is outlined for you in your textbook, states that different cultures have different moral codes. Therefore, there's no objective truth in morality, and right and wrong are only matters of opinion, and opinions are going to vary from culture to culture. Is this a sound argument? Your author is going to say, no, not necessarily. It's not a sound argument because the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the premise. It instead attempts to drive or derive a conclusion about a subject from the mere fact that people disagree with it. And for your author and many others, this is a problem. So, for instance, let me give you an example. Some people think that the earth is flat. Now, we believe that the earth is spherical. So does it follow from the mere fact that people disagree that there's no objective truth in that, in geography? No, of course not. We realize that there is objective truth in geography. It just may be that they are wrong. So there's no reason to think, though, that if the world is round, everyone must know it. So that might be where the issue comes in terms of cultural relativism. What are some problems with cultural relativism? One, it doesn't allow us to criticize the customs of other societies. And while that might seem noble, maybe there are times when we need to criticize other societies. For example, what about societies and cultures that are under political oppression. Most of us would probably think that political oppression is wrong wherever it occurs. But under cultural relativism, we wouldn't be able to condemn those practices as wrong. 2, we cannot criticize the code of our own society. So if you ask the question as to whether or not a practice is in line with the code of the society, and it is, then you can't question it. Yet few of us think our moral codes are perfect, which leads to the problem of the ability to have societal change. If you can never criticize that something might be wrong and that there's a better way, how does society evolve and how does society change? And since we know that societies do evolve and do change, then perhaps this theory isn't logical. It doesn't allow, number 3, for us to make moral progress. If you define progress as replacing the old with new, by what standard do we judge if something is better? Just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. If we have made moral progress, that's to say that today our standards are better, and that would be judging, and cultural relativists would say that judging is wrong. We can't judge. And my last point is that maybe there are universal truths. Maybe there are moral rules that all societies everywhere embrace because those are the rules that are necessary for a society to exist. Now, your author talks about several of those, one being honesty, killing, as well as raising and caring for children. And so maybe that is true. Maybe there are such things as universal truths. And if there are, then that would lead us to say that cultural relativism is incorrect. Now, that doesn't mean that I think we should necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I think that there probably are good points to cultural relativism as well. Of course, cultural relativism is going to warn us of the dangers that assuming that our preferences are based on some absolute rational standard. Maybe it's reminding us of the things that we think are right and wrong are nothing more than social conventions. If you remember back, and I don't remember how long ago this was, but it was a Super Bowl performance with Janet Jackson, and there was a wardrobe malfunction. And those in our society, in the United States, felt that was very inappropriate. In fact, the FCC actually penalized CBS, I believe, millions of dollars and fined them because of the inappropriateness of bearing a breast on national television. However, if that happened in other societies, that wouldn't have been an issue. So it might tell us that some of these things that are absolutely wrong, such as bearing your breast on national television, might not necessarily be anything more than a social convention. It might change from culture to culture to culture. And of course, cultural relativism reminds us to be tolerant, reminds us to keep an open mind.